Hello, welcome to Future Left Podcast. I'm Adam Simpson here at Future Left. We're going to talk about all things regarding the future. Today we're going to be having a big old segment on basic income. For now, I'm Adam Simpson here with Casey Rogers as always. We need you to follow us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, or do the reverse of the things I just said. Also follow us on SoundCloud and subscribe to us on iTunes. And endorse us on LinkedIn. We're talking about the bleeding edge news, me and my good buddy Casey, before we get into our basic income chat. So, Casey, news this week was pretty stellar. My favorite story actually was about it was a report from a group called Tent something. I don't know. It was written up in a Guardian article by Patrick Kingsley on the 18th of May, year of our Lord 2016, and it was tentsomething.org. That's not the right one, but anyway, okay. It basically said that refugees are basically a bonus to the societies they come in on. They create more jobs, increase demand for goods, blah blah blah. The report estimated that refugees are going to cost the governments in Europe about 69 billion euros over the next between 2015 and 2020. During that same period, they'll help grow the economy by 126.6 billion euros. So you get just about almost twice as much as you put in, which is a pretty darn good investment.
Those facts are going to make it difficult to make the argument that they are an invading horde of criminals and rapists.
That's true, Casey. Typically, the argument is that refugees are costly, but helping them out is the right thing to do. Turns out that's wrong. It's not costly, and it's the right thing to do.
Wrong thing.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, basically just the refugees aren't a burden. I really enjoyed that. Here's a nice little quote that I wanted to read to you. While of course the primary motivation to let refugees in is that they're fleeing death. Once they arrive, they can contribute to the recovery. I thought that was a weird sentence because it's like, they're fleeing death, but don't focus on that. The real thing is how much money we're going to make. The main point was like, and help them get access to work in legitimate economies. Because typically, if you bar them from work, they end up, they still got to eat, so that they'll end up going to the black market and criminal and. You won't maybe criminal organizations, but probably not. Just
people like to talk about how lazy and shifty these people are, but they also want to make it difficult for them to get jobs.
But yeah, just accelerate their entrance to the workforce. That way they start paying. That way they start paying taxes.
Adam, this actually reminds me of my favorite article from the week because you're talking about refugees and the people who hate them, and my article was about the people who hate refugees, notably right-wing nutbags.
Oh.
Now,
this is the Washington Post article, right?
Yes, it is. The Washington Post. And it's talking about these self-styled watchdog groups that are sort of... Al-Qaeda and also Vanilla ISIS. Like Vanilla Ice Cream.
Yeah.
And Vanilla Ice, the rap terrorist of Garland, Texas fame. Woot! But
big shout out to our friends in Garland,
Texas. Yeah. So these groups are known by law enforcement officials as anti-government extremists, militias, armed militants, and even domestic terrorists. But they view themselves as defenders of the Constitution, of course, an argument that we hear a lot, being Southerners, and.
I thought that was one of the most interesting things. The guy, like in the little video they had on Washington Post, they were talking about, we just go around handing out the Constitution to people, and there was like all these little buzzwords. Like when the Post asked these people, like, what does America mean to you? One guy was just like, land of the free, home of the brave. And there's just a lot of buzzwords. You know what I mean? I don't know that there's.
Well, of course it is. They talk about how the government is trying to stick it to us by abuses in land rights, infringement on gun rights, and freedom of speech, which is interesting because I feel like when they say freedom of speech is being limited, I feel like what they mean is other people are getting to say things that they don't want to hear.
Sure, and in languages they don't want to hear.
Yeah, why should I have to push English on the ATM? This is England.
How inconvenient is that?
This is England, people.
No, what actually struck me when reading that article was it reminds, because working on the Middle East like I do, it reminds me of my kind of thinking on countering violent extremism, because just like ISIS, and it's kind of mean to compare these guys to ISIS, even though we've already done
poor
that.
ISIS.
We've
Poor
already,
ISIS.
but no, I mean, because a lot of these guys, like there's this one great little segment that they have. This guy give his interpretation of the Constitution. I think his name was Soper.
B.J. Soper.
B.J. Soper. That's
Can't make that up.
It's a ridiculous name. But anyway, he gives his interpretation of the constitutionality of whether the government can own land, and then right next to it they have a constitutional law professor give his interpretation, and these guys
was B.J. Soper. Hold on. Let me guess. Was B.J. Soper's more informed?
It was not. This is the thing we talk about a lot when we talk about I'm just going to kind of say the right wing kind of confidence in their ignorance type of thing. Like
sure.
in his mind, the Constitution is very, very clear, and the constitutional law professor is like, the Constitution's vague as hell.
But isn't that how most things are? The more you know about it, the more you realize it's very complex.
Exactly, and that's why it reminds me of Islamic extremism, because you have people like B.J. Soper, who was never interested in politics or anything like that, and then one day, a switch is flipped, whether it's
probably by racism,
the Cliven Bundy Ranch thing, or
they've actually said they say that a lot of these types of groups have picked up during the Obama administration. So it's odd that it coincides with our first black president.
That was my favorite part. It was like the Southern Poverty Law Center was like, there were 150 of these groups in 2008, and then suddenly today there's 1,000. Like, it's like
just say it, Southern Poverty Law.
A black guy got elected, and suddenly all these people just started clinging to the guns.
Ted Nugent said he was going to murder him, and we did nothing. So we were sort of asking for it.
The guy Soper, who's like they described him. What did they describe him as? A creature of ESPN. Oh. That's what a creature of ESPN.
Yeah.
Who strayed away from politics. Like he was not a political guy, and then one day we just got angry, I guess.
Not a constitutional law scholar.
Yeah, it kind
of
like
the first black president.
I don't know how to word this. Maybe like unmitigated information. He just got on the internet, and every dumb idea that he came across, just a few that were mentioned in the article,
that fit his pre-existing worldview, though.
Yeah, pre-existing worldview. This one world government nonsense. They never said the sovereign citizen movement, but that's a typical thing on the right.
That's a very common thing.
He was like he didn't know if the government did 9/11 or not, which is a weird thing. Hey,
that's a weird thing to say. Why bring that up?
He suspects that the government has a cure for cancer. But the pharmaceutical companies make too much.
That's why no one in the government ever dies of cancer.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Jimmy Carter got cured just last year, and that guy's gonna live forever.
The power of peanuts.
Yeah.
He's Jimmy Carter, by the way, widely known as history's greatest villain. But experts now say that there's a second wave that's spreading. They say the first one came around in the early '90s with Waco and stuff like that. And now there's a second wave that they tie to social media, oddly enough, and which enables them to become more influential and to spread their unverified information, unverifiable information more quickly.
And again, it's the same. I know I keep steering the conversation this way, but ISIS, they spread their message mostly on Twitter and stuff like that.
And very adeptly, actually. ISIS's stuff is very
But it always seems to me that if you can condense your ideology into 140 characters or less, then there ain't much there. But
the average armed militant doesn't have time to be reading all kinds of words at them.
Well, it's like if it's just like what they did with the constitutional law professor. If you have stupid asshole al-Baghdadi give his interpretation on one issue of Islamic law, and then you have an Islamic law professor give his interpretation, you're gonna. I mean, it's just like,
the Islamic law professor is probably going.
He's probably going to be
right. He's going to be giving several interpretations, whereas al-Baghdadi has one that you can probably predict, knowing his track record.
Yeah. But,
it's very rare that guys like al-Baghdadi ever discover something new in Islamic law that makes them go, "Oh, hold on, wait a second, hold on. maybe I was wrong about this."
It says here, be nice.
They only ever discover stuff that they already agreed with.
Yeah.
Which is a convenient type of world to live in, I think.
What was interesting to me, there was almost a working class angle here, and maybe I'm imposing this on the article, but like he was talking about the land rights thing, and with you know, the government pushing for environmental regulations, putting people out of work, and devastating local economies. He didn't even talk like that, by the way. That's just how people in my mind
That's how
on the
you
right.
hear him.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
people in right wing militias. That's just how they talk. I don't know.
I think so. I think I should also mention that B.J. Soper retired. He retired from being a professional rodeo rider in his 20s, by the way. So I think the blue collar thing is definitely there.
Yeah. So he was a scholar in his own right. But yeah, those are our two favorite stories. Well, not favorite's a weird word. Being like, yeah, you're right wing militias. But those are the two stories we decided to talk about this week from the Bleeding Edge newsletter, which you should subscribe to on our website at futureleft.org. And the other thing, before we get to our basic income conversation, I had a new article this week. It was very good. I've already been told. Thank you. I'm pointing a gun at Casey right now. So,
No,
but
he's not.
no, I'm not. It would do no good. But no, it's called "Why Austin Should Seize the Means of Transportation," and that is just a brilliant title. I've been trying to track down the guy that came up with it, so I can give him.
It's so close to something you always say. So you're like,
I-
this guy's a genius.
So I can give him a back rub, you know.
Okay, well, I mean a pat on the back, right?
No. Yeah, no, it was just about recently Uber and Lyft left Austin. I think we actually talked about this not too long ago.
We did.
They left over this fingerprint thing. There's a labor controversy because of the independent contractor versus employee debate. But in my mind, what I really want to see the sharing economy do is kind of share the wealth, because I'm a dirty lefty. So I basically looked at other cooperative initiatives in the sharing economy and made some recommendations that might push local drivers to investigate those options in Austin. I think it's, especially since Lyft and Uber are gone, two big ride-sharing giants. I think the opportunities there for them. You could actually get on our website, look at the article. I encourage you to read it. But there's also a comment. I think it might be just from some Uber Lyft ride-sharing bot type of thing.
It was pretty good.
Because it didn't, like, I guess he mentioned my article a few times, but he didn't mention worker ownership, which I felt like was the main drive of my article. He didn't mention it at all. He's just like, Uber and Lyft do X, Y, and Z for local economies. They made transportation more affordable for minorities. And I'm like, that's all great. I'm for that.
I think the comment was written by the same guy who writes the instructions on packs of chopsticks.
No, I feel like he's written this comment before, and he was copying and pasting a lot.
Bits and pieces. It seemed very choppy.
Yeah, it just didn't seem relevant to my article, and he kept calling me sir, which was like this weird.
Which, if you know Adam,
Yeah.
he is not deserving of that level of respect.
No. But anyway, you should definitely check that out online. Coming up next week is another article. I'm not going to tell you what it's about because we haven't decided yet.
No, you ruined the mystique.
I did.
You should have said you got to tune in to find out.
You got to tune in to find out.
I'm just kidding. Jennifer Lawrence ruined Mystique.
Well, Anyway.
Nerd joke.
Very nerdy joke. But anyway, now we're gonna kick it to the conversation we had on basic income. I think you're gonna enjoy it. Now you're gonna be hearing myself, Adam Simpson, my partner Casey Rogers, platonic partner, and then our Future Left co-founder Michael Bufano from Egypt. Basic income, the idea that basically everyone gets a little bit of money to make sure they can cover their basic necessities. It was an idea posed by different segments of political spectrum, whether it be the right, who would like to see a smaller government, or the left, who would like to see more benefits. But basically the idea is that everyone gets some money to help meet their basic needs so that no one dips below a certain level. It's not means tested, so it's not based on your income. So even if you're filthy rich, you get a little bit of money, just enough. You get the same amount of money. If it's universal, everyone gets the same. But it's an idea that's gaining some traction because of the threat of technological unemployment. There was a great article in Vice it was talking about you shouldn't talk about robots without talking about basic income. It kind of lays out a few different industries here, but just thinking about the rise of self-driving cars could take 3 million drivers off the road, and as well as 6.8 million jobs that are employed elsewhere in that industry. Police, the speeding tickets, they accrue about $6 billion a year from that source. lawyers and insurance companies that specialize in traffic disputes and traffic incidents, the mechanics that specialize in that. This could be a pretty disruptive technology, and this is just one element of automation. One study predicts that about 47% of U.S. jobs could be automated by 2033. Of course, could be automated is not will be automated. Other estimates say that 1/4 by 2025. That's the Boston Consulting Group. 1/3 by 2025. That's Gartner, which is a tech research firm. So that's kind of the backdrop of universal basic income. Casey, I know you had some pushback on the notion that more and more industries will be automated in a short amount of time. So how do you feel about just the premise of universal basic income?
Okay, well, I personally am not completely convinced that this is sort of a impending issue. I mean, probably in the very long term it will be, but when I think of it still seems a little science fiction-y to me, and that could just be because of how electric and low emission vehicles have been around for so long, and then we've been told that they're going to be the norm. There's been so much pushback that 15 years after the first few electronic and low emission vehicles were created, they still aren't being driven by a majority of the population. It makes me think of the whole flying cars thing, the flying cars where we were told that in the future there's going to be flying cars, and we were all like,
George Jetson.
Hold on, there's a big difference though, right? I mean, flying cars were completely fantasy. There was no theory behind it, or there was no practicality behind it. We actually have cars that currently can run without human beings behind the wheel. And on top of that, it doesn't take a huge change in the amount of jobs that will be destroyed by automation to have a great effect on the economy.
Technology often seems to not just continue unabated at its own pace. We sort of have this idea that technology will just continue to increase and increase and increase. That seems to be a fact of history. But now it seems like there's so much legislation that gets in the way, that technology doesn't just go along at its own pace. There's issues of greed and industry. For example, how they're going to be distributing this money to people.
Universal basic income?
It seems like the big pushback to that would be from the right. They would be hearing, "Oh, here comes the wealth redistribution thing."
Yeah.
It's the commies.
Creating laziness and
Exactly.
Yeah, and I do want to get into that kind of the underlying philosophy of work, and we'll try to illustrate that later. In terms of automated driving, Uber is piloting a self-driving car in Pittsburgh right now. So it doesn't seem to me to be too far along. And these estimates, they vary in terms of self-driving cars and in terms of automation. I just said some people think X by 2033, some people think Y by 2025, and there are a lot of different estimates. But I get a sense that it is going to happen. The technology is going to be there, and I do think that ride-sharing apps are going to be leading that mainly because of their labor disputes, and that's going to be the next article we host. By the time this podcast airs, it will be available.
So you think in the near future there's going to be a thing where drunk people will call self-driving vehicles to come take them home?
I think it's with everybody. It's if you're going to work on a daily basis, if you're doing a long distance trip, imagine a day where nobody owns a car. Everybody can just go on their app, and you have automatic cars driving around the city, and they could go and pick you up.
But that's what seems far-fetched, and that's what seems far-fetched to me, is the idea that we're going to give up personal ownership is such a fundamental structure in our minds, especially in capitalist societies. That are people going to give up the idea of owning cars to the idea of
even going away from personal ownership? You can personally own a self-driving vehicle,
right?
Some of the Tesla models that they're preparing have self-driving features, And those are supposed to debut to some capacity in 2017. Now, the technology is mostly good at highway driving, not so much urban areas where you're making a lot of turns and you're dealing with a lot of different styles of traffic. But on the highway, it does really well. So oddly enough, it works better at high speeds.
And I can imagine in the day when this technology comes, we're not going to have automatic driving Porsches picking people, up randomly. It'll be a much cheaper.
Right, sure.
That goes around and picks you up.
So
right?
what's going to happen? So at some point, will there be self-driving cars and manual-driven cars on the roads at the same time? And
yes.
what will that be? What will that be like?
I think that's kind of a headache, but I mean, I think that the automatic driving, the self-driving cars can kind of see. They're made to perceive other cars on the road and act accordingly. I would actually predict that most of the accidents in such a situation will be caused by human error, not by self-driving cars and by the software.
In the article I read, they said one of the jobs that would be hurt by it would be people involved in physical therapy, because there would be less accidents on the road, right? So
I don't know. That just I don't know. That seems like, that just seems to me like people of the mindset of like, yeah, technology will save us. Technology will be our savior. It'll be so much better. But I can't help but think we're going to have the same amount of problems in that structure as we do now. Like, I don't think our problems ever diminish. I think we just get new problems.
It's the same argument with jobs, right? So people estimate that, like, if we lose 7 million jobs from the global economy, and then but this new automation, these types of systems will create 2 million more. That's still a net 5 million jobs lost to stuff like this. That was from a McKinsey report.
Because of entropy, there's always going to be problems in political systems. No solution is going to create a utopia, no matter how well we implement it. So we're always going to have to deal with new problems, no matter what the technological solution is or the political solution is to a problem.
I don't dispute that at all. But I'm not suggesting that automation is going to create a world without problems. I'm suggesting that automation, if we don't prepare for it properly, could create a lot of problems. And I do think that automation is going to be on the rise. Computerization, jobs being lost because it's cheaper to pay for software or some sort of AI or some sort of robot or whatever that can do a job that either partially takes away from the work of a human or completely takes away from the work of a human.
So, Adam, you're of the mindset that technological advancement is basically a force of nature, that it's going to happen regardless. But what about the argument that economic interests are actually stronger than technological advancement? Don't our economic and business interests and political interests don't those dictate what sort of technological advancements happen and at the rate at which they happen?
In terms of patent law, for example, Casey, whenever a company wants to weed out the competition, they could buy out patents from smaller companies that invent new technologies. So that certainly does slow down the pace of development.
But the issue is we're not seeing right now, and I don't think we will see, the government intervening into, for instance, AI research.
But couldn't that just be because their interests in this area haven't made themselves apparent yet? Isn't it possible that because when automobiles first began, I don't know that the industries involved in that were aware of lobbying abilities to the government for. Such as the petroleum industry. I don't think that they were immediately like, oh, this new technology, so we can start making sure that our interests are maintained. And if anyone comes up with a different fuel source, that takes a couple of decades with any new technology for the politicians and for the business owners to start thinking about ways to undercut the system.
Our society is organized very differently now. We have industry giants that are moving a lot faster than the government. There was a story this week about an artificial intelligence, which I read the article. It seems more like a very sophisticated database with some AI component for search mechanisms, but it's basically being touted as an AI attorney that can do kind of paralegal research and find cases that are relevant to X, Y, and Z.
It's a utility. It won't be operating on its own. It'll just be operating in conjunction with an actual person.
Sure. Well, it'll be, yeah, but I mean, if someone at a law firm can access this kind of database and this kind of artificial intelligence, they may not hire a paralegal to research the case data. That's my point. Is that I think that a lot of these things are going to make human labor specifically not as necessary. That's all.
But will they be able? But do you think they'll be able to offer the same quality of service that an actual thinking human being will be able to offer?
I do.
Theoretically, one day, right? I mean, if you look at,
it's not about theoretically. I mean, you can see this right now if you follow some of the research that's being done, whether it's on language software that Google and others are developing. That is far more advanced than something like Siri. I know we all joke about how shitty Siri is, but Yeah, I mean the quality of these advancements is increasing rapidly, and
From what I read from one of the articles that we read this week, it seems like in terms of mechanical automation, they've already surpassed in most areas of mass production human capabilities, and that they're catching up very quickly in terms of creative thought, being able to think outside the box.
Yeah.
So within the next few years, we can expect to see that these machines are going to be able to outdo us in a large percentage of jobs.
So don't you guys agree that the advancement of certain technologies, and I'll go back again to alternative fuel sourced vehicles like electric vehicles or even hybrid vehicles, don't you guys agree though that their level of advancement does not match their prevalence in our society, and that's due to political and financial.
I think that's changing. I think that's changing. It's true that the electric car was mostly killed by efforts of other industries, of competing industries. That I do think that's true. But at this stage, the technology has gotten so much better that it's very hard for people to stymie it the way it was before. Now we have. The cars move a lot faster. The electronic cars that were killed back in the early aughts, those, it took a very long time to accelerate. They didn't get to the speeds that conventional cars get to.
But it's not just about their own merits, right? It's about the ability of the petroleum industry to put money in the pockets of. I mean, I know that has more to do with legislation on emissions and things like that, but. It's not just based on their own merits. There's still mechanizations, business mechanizations, political ones, economic ones.
Well,
there's people that have interest in these technologies not advancing.
Well, from what we discussed a few weeks ago on oil companies, right? I mean, we have $21 billion a year in subsidies still being given to politicians. So and of course, over 70% of our energy needs still come from oil. So I can't imagine at least the immediate future that these companies are going to go away. But at a certain point in the long-term future, within the next quarter of a century, half a century,
I really don't think it's a quarter of a century. That's the problem. I mean, like I said, we have people that do this kind of work that are projecting 2033, 47% of people that have their jobs eliminated. How many people created? That's a fair argument. That's a fair argument.
But that seems like, I don't know, that just seems like the sky is falling sort of talk. I don't.
I mean, it's completely realistic. I mean, I don't know how to make the case, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, I fall more on Adam's side on this issue. I think automation is going to cause a huge economic structural readjustment.
No, absolutely. I don't disagree on that. I disagree on the timeline, I think.
First of all, the business has a very large incentive to move toward automation because classically the struggle over the economy has been between capital and labor. And now we're moving. If you can completely circumvent the component of labor, or at least partially circumvent that component of labor, then I think that's a tremendous opportunity to get more profit, and that's what our system runs on. And that's why I think that by and large, in terms of automation, we can have a different argument about electric vehicles. I see that almost every major car producer has an electronic vehicle in their future plans by 2020. So I mean this is where the industry is moving. They're wanting to get into these markets.
I think before automation is able to eliminate jobs, and not even in a negative way. I think a lot of the jobs it's going to be eliminating are jobs that we would define as toil. I think before it's able to do that, I think a lot of our cultural perceptions about work and the meaning of work are going to have to change, because so many people derive meaning from work that in order to say, a lot of people that think yes, humans should be doing these meaningless, repetitive.
The direct part of the end of the quote. The secret to happiness through work is earned success, the belief that you are creating your life and value in the lives of others. Americans who feel success in the workplace are twice as likely to say that they're happy overall. When people aren't working, they increasingly watch TV, and that's actually something we ran into in one of the articles we read. I believe that one was on Quartz about basic income. That basically in places where there are longer work hours, people tend to come home and do meaningless things like watch sports and also other forms of nonsensical TV. Not like the very classy TV that I watch. What do you guys think of this argument? And there's another quote, and I know Casey's going to get irritated with me for quoting Voltaire, but often quoted in arguments about technological job loss. This is the quote: "Work saves man from three great evils: boredom, vice, and need." So what do we think about really just the idea that people are going to lose their jobs or work less? And part of this goes into the basic income argument, because if people are getting more money, do you think that means they won't want, or they're getting a certain baseline of money? Does that mean that they won't want to work?
I know from a personal perspective, like I take a lot of, like, part of my self-identity is tied into being a teacher, and I couldn't imagine doing something else with my life. And if one day machines came by and said, you as a teacher are now useless,
obsolete,
I would be devastated.
I don't see things like teaching. I don't. I mean, I see certain aspects of teaching being more integrated with technology as sort of supplemental. But I don't see a human being teaching others. I don't see that as ever becoming obsolete.
Computers are becoming a much more important part of the classroom, and although we can't envision it now, it's you can imagine some distant future where this is an issue. But even with any other job, let's say if you're a police officer. I know my brother, who takes a lot of pride in, being a cop, right? And now we're just seeing a lot of these machines replace the role of traffic cops. What happens one day when police officers are no longer, needed?
I think as these technologies increase, I think we're going to have to make distinctions between jobs that should be automated and jobs that shouldn't be. In teaching, certain things are becoming automated, such as research and grading. Grading, I think, like if you have like a Scantron and you need, I don't think there's anything wrong with a machine grading Scantron exams. Research, I think that's something that we would all agree is a skill that human beings need to retain.
No, I agree. There are jobs that there is a certain kind of socialization required, and even as computers get more capable of reading people's emotions and stuff like that, I think that you're going to see people that prefer production with a human touch. For instance, if everyone is capable of 3D printing whatever IKEA model they want, they may still prefer to go to a carpenter. And some people may prefer to be carpenters, even though there's not as huge a demand for it anymore.
Well, and that's going to free up a lot of people who would otherwise be doing repetitive, menial things to perhaps be more artisanal in their approach to things. Like, you've already got people nowadays who have day jobs, and in their off time, they are brilliant artists in what they create, and
right.
I think this will free up a lot more passion career paths like that.
Specifically, automation frees us up to do that, and basic income is what might allow that to be possible.
Yeah, if you have that universal income, right? Maybe you could do one of these part-time jobs where, okay, even if you don't earn enough money where you would otherwise be able to survive, you have that other basic income coming from the government.
Here's one thing I wanted to bring up about basic income. A lot of the time, it's the reason it's been celebrated by some people on the right, including Milton Friedman, who at times I think is the devil.
Sure, he's the devil.
The reason basic income was supported by Milton Friedman is, first of all, because it allows the government to get smaller. So instead of having Medicaid, food stamps, Social Security, you have this one basic income. Everyone gets it.
And then you cut the bureaucracy from the...
Exactly. It cuts the bureaucracy substantially. How do you all feel about that approach to social service and welfare? Because I actually have some issues with it, I guess. I support the idea that people get a certain amount of money that helps them make rent and food and stuff like that. But I don't know. I feel like maybe we still need something like... Social Security.
Right. What happens when you retire and now
exactly.
you'll only be getting that very basic level. Yeah, and that's sort of the argument that a lot of people have when they talk about wealth redistribution, which they always do with the greatest of finesse and nuance. They always say, well, if everyone gets, if the wealth all gets distributed, it's going to be very little and very thinly spread. And that's the one thing that I sort of have an issue with this. If you're just sort of thinly spreading around a basic income, what happens if someone gets laid off? What happens if someone gets injured and now they're living only off of this? minuscule income. They don't have any sort of workers' comp, or they don't have any sort of, compensatory
Yeah.
pay. That's a big issue. There would still need to be some sort of social financial net.
Plus,
I
if it's
think.
universal, we're still people in the top 20% 30% are now going
Yeah.
to be collecting.
That's
Yeah, and
again,
that's crazy too.
That's another thing I have an issue I have with basic income. Like, why would we give everyone, let's say a baseline of $20,000 a year?
Right,
Uh,
and as soon as you start trying to say people above this income level won't get it, people will say you're trying to punish the wealthy.
if
Ease
we're
back in.
taking money on a certain like rate to pay for this, then people at the top would be giving more than they're actually would be giving more
Yeah.
and not getting the same 20% or $20,000 or whatever the baseline that would be set is.
If we do this universal income, how should we go about it? Should we experiment first, kind of like what happened in Kansas recently, where you had a governor who experimented with very radical neoliberal policies? Should we
Yeah.
do something similar, but on, with universal income, where we experiment with some towns and cities?
Mike, it's great that you bring that up because that's what people are doing right now. There was a big experiment in Canada that was basically it turned out to be very successful. No one knew that until 2011 when it was studied. But decades ago, I should have written down the date. Canada had a test pilot of what they called minimum income that I don't think it gave money to everyone, but it guaranteed that everyone made a certain amount. And so families in Dauphin received, I'm probably, or Dauphin, I don't know, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but they received a monthly stipend that replaced other benefits, and this supplement was reduced by 50 cents for every dollar that they earned by working. And so the net effects of this were pretty substantial. You had women staying home longer with their newborns. You had a higher high school graduate rate because this was an agricultural community. They let them complete school rather than go work on the farm. You had a drop in hospital visits. You had very small reduction of working hours, 1% among men, 5% among unmarried women, and 3% among married women.
That's pretty surprising right there. Just you would expect a bigger drop. But I guess it is just one case study. We might need to experiment with more towns and cities.
So Ontario is interested in piloting this. Finland is as well. It'll be on a referendum in Switzerland this June. And
Finland's always down.
all right, buddy. And then an NGO is experimenting with this type of basic income for as a development project in Kenya. So we're going to have a lot more data about this idea and what the effects are on different types of communities. I think you have to start local with something like this because if you think about what a basic income should be, it's probably very different for, say, Kansas than it is to New York, than it is to Miami.
Would basic income, would that have to come with some form of trying to regulate the cost of living across the United States? Because right now that's a big issue, like Adam just alluded to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree because I mean that's the problem that most people have with the idea of universal health care coverage, and it's a problem I have with the way the government approaches universal health care coverage or the proponents of it. I mean, until we bring down the cost of health care, I don't know that it makes sense to do that. I think it makes morally sense to do that, but in terms of economic dollars and cents to do that, I don't know that it makes sense if we're not going to go after pharmaceutical companies and just insane healthcare rates. If we don't address kind of the fundamental problems in our the cost of living.
Some places the cost of living is higher, and in order for the same process to go across the entire United States, how are you going to reconcile some place like Sandusky, Ohio, with some place like Manhattan?
You could tie it to something called,
Sandusky. Don't bring that pedophile up.
Yeah, you could tie it to a statistic called purchasing power parity, and each local areas in different states, they adjust their GDP per capita with something called PPP. It's purchasing power parity. If you did that, you put in the equation, and depending on where you lived, where you were registered, that would determine the amount of money you got. But I could also see a lot of fraud with that because you'd have someone maybe who would register themselves in New York, and they would go and move to Florida or whatever.
The problem with that comes down to oversight, regulation, and transparency. And that's actually one of the criticisms. It would require more bureaucracy to monitor. This article came from The Independent. that called Basic Income: A Dangerous Idea. You can read it if you like. There's a lot of stipulation that goes into a lot of welfare programs, like food stamps. You can't spend it, obviously, on cigarettes and alcohol. Wouldn't a basic income imply that the government has more say over your life? Do you think that's true? Do you think that's not true? What do you think?
There is an argument to be made that if you have like certain local governments that are bigger in size, they will have a tendency to regulate your lives more. But I don't think it's that it's necessarily going to happen. Governments in like places like New York City do tend to be more progressive in terms of managing how people could spend their money. I remember Michael Bloomberg, who came very close to passing a law banning, the size of soda drinks in restaurants, and of course, these huge taxes on the cost of buying a pack of cigarettes.
If we give someone money, we're not saying you have to spend this on rent or food. We're saying this is the money you get. As we said earlier, I think it requires more experimentation, but I think it's a pretty good idea in terms of technological unemployment. If I own, for instance, a ride-sharing app that has a fleet of self-driving cars, there are obviously expenses to that, but I won't need a basic income. I'll be almost like an oligarch. I'll be so far removed from any structure of need or any. Do you all see what I'm trying to suggest here?
Now this basic income is slowly transforming back into a welfare system. You'll get it if you're not handsomely employed.
My answer to automation and technological unemployment is co-ownership. And you even see this in Denver, a ride-sharing app that's being developed as a worker-owned enterprise. All of these people having equity in the company and being part of it, if they move toward automation, those people still have a livelihood, they still have a say in how this company is operating, and they're not made to be dependent. They're not going to be beholden to whatever CEO from Silicon Valley is deciding to do with the company. The automated system is still theirs, and they can still derive meaningful life from it, and as well as income.
That's a social, psychological, cultural structure that's going to have to be changed. Like that's a very fundamental aspect of our society that we have certain expectations of, and that we have certain fundamental beliefs about that are going to have to be reworked. Our thinking about these things. That's what makes a lot of this unwieldy. A lot of this, it seems like there are very clear solutions, but we'll have to be moving our entire society towards this, and that's very unwieldy. Human beings are the most unwieldy part of these equations.
We're obsessed, right, with trying to find stability psychologically. Just look at Great Britain. I mean, they still have a queen, for God's sake.
So what do we do about this? I guess that's going to be a lot of education, right? That's going to be revamping the education system, like we always discuss.
I'm actually a believer that if a leader gets in power and he has, if he gets elected and he has the vision to pursue these policies, he can probably do it. He can probably start moving the economy in a certain direction, whether it's easing regulations for employee stock ownership plans or other worker ownership schemes.
Even if that's against the will of the people currently?
No, I don't think it's against the will of the people. I mean, first of all, when a leader's job is to sell an idea to some degree. So, like, Obama campaigned in part on the expanded healthcare coverage, and when he got in, he fought for it, and he eventually got it, and he had to protect it, and etc. It was a whole process. Every leader is going to have to go through that, and I think that's healthy. Stirring that national conversation, it's difficult, but that's the way it has to work. And then, with something like basic income or cooperative industries and worker ownership, I think you start that conversation at the national level and do what you can from there. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to local experimentation.
So having a more participatory democracy, that's ideally what we're supposed to be, right? We're supposed to be engaged. Our media is supposed to educate us so we can be actively engaged and educated regarding the political system. But that's another big step for us, because I feel like that hasn't been the case thus far, to its full potential at least.
Well, it's always going to be a struggle over ideas. Look at the amount of struggle it took just to get labor rights. We had the first labor unions in the early 19th century, and it took over 100 years for those labor unions to be able to gain political recognition. My one fear is that we might not have enough time here to engage in that struggle.
Even with something like climate change, where I'm like, God damn it, if we can just avoid all these idiots and have someone that can just get shit done, that'd be nice. But at the end of the day, it's not healthy for a society to endure shocks like that. Basic income and worker ownership, any strategy to confront technological unemployment, it's going to have to happen faster than we'd like. It's going to require some sort of shock, because if we don't do anything, it's going to be an even bigger shock. We can do something now, and we can start reorienting our economy now, which will be difficult, or we can do it later once the shit has hit the fan and we're basically scrambling.
There's going to be a balancing act between needing immediate action and also our democratic process. So we're going to be riding that line between something needing immediate action and things being down to the wire, and there's a precipice that's approaching.
You would like to think that the 2008 crisis would have been enough for us to make some desperately needed reforms, but maybe something much worse needs to take place beforehand.
Yeah, because we tend to be very complacent when we're comfortable, and I think that you're right, Mike, that if in order for us to really act decisively, we'll need to have a lot of that comfort stripped away.
I just really have to push back on this. We can't. I don't believe we should wait in these particular crises to wait for our back to be up against the wall. When you look at political transition and economic transition, the classic debate on the left is reform or revolution. And in my experience, revolutions don't always go your way. Zizek, he said people are gonna hate that I brought up Zizek. But he said that and I think actually he's quoting someone, but he said that behind every fascism is a failed revolution. Even recently in the Middle East, Sisi is the product of a failed revolution. The rise of Islamism is a fact of the failed Arab nationalist movements. And you look in Libya, which is pulling itself back together. And that revolution was successful, and look at the turmoil that the country's gone through and is going through. You look at Syria, which right now it's a failed revolution. It turned into war. You've got 12 million people displaced, not most of them, but many of them dispersed throughout the world, and that's probably how it's going to be. It's going to be like the Armenian diaspora with various populations in various countries.
The modern European state was built not off peaceful consultation, but violence. We have statistics from Great Britain.
No, absolutely. The 19th century was one of the most bloody in history.
Every single time the government was able to raise taxes and engage in more social programs, it always followed a war. It took a war for the government to be able to raise taxes, engage in more social programs. Unfortunately, this might just be a reality. I've recently just read a book by Charles Tilly, and one of his theories, and it's backed by a lot of historical evidence, we tend to only engage in collective action when there's something to fear.
What's more frightening than the planet warming until we can't live here, or our economy being taken away from us and we all end up unemployed?
But until that happens, it's still arguable.
We don't have any political leaders right now making this case. And maybe this is a podcast with three idiots, but maybe it seems silly that I'm sitting here trying to make the case that we are in danger, but no political leaders seem to be at all concerned about technological advances leading to unemployment. I've never heard that brought up. I hear arguments about trade. Our jobs are going to Mexico or whatever, or Mexicans are taking our jobs or some bullshit like that. But no one's talking about 47% unemployment by 2033.
Right, but I think that's because I think our politicians don't want to be accused of fear mongering.
Are you kidding?
Because
are you
that
kidding?
looks like no. Because no. What I'm I know they do that. No. I know they do that, but I'm saying there's certain. I don't know. There's certain things that they will do that with, and certain things they won't. Like if you do that with technology, like people can still argue that no, that's not going to happen with technology because people aren't facing a minor version of that. Like with terrorism and things like that, things have happened already. So you can sort of fearmonger as much as you want to. People say, "Oh yes, I saw that on the news," but no one's seeing technology on a huge scale take jobs now.
Whereas when you see an act of terrorism, terrorism's so rare in the United States. You have a better chance of getting struck by lightning. But because it's something that you catch on video, it's something that's very clear and evident, you could play over and over and over again. It scares people, and that's why we spend such a disproportionate amount of money on trying to fight terrorism, Whereas with something like global warming, with long-term technological development, it is harder for people to kind of grasp these concepts.
I thought that I was the fatalist here, but I seem to get a sense that you both of you think that without emergency, people running through the streets with their pants on their head and blood on their face or something.
No, I don't think it should take that, but I think it probably will. I fear that it will.
It's probably going to take a Mad Max type of situation.
I mean,
Charlize Theron.
4 episodes in a row, Mad Max reference.
That's pretty good.
Yes, that's right.
And I've noticed that, Adam. You didn't mention Elon Musk though, so I'm happy about that.
What I hope is that what's different now between like the 17th century and today is that we have educational institutions, we have mass media, and what I hope is that sites like ours and others can change the nature of politics by educating the public. However, I have my doubts, and I just based on human nature.
Back to universal basic income. Supposed to be the topic for today. This could be a way to where we get towards something like a 15-hour work week. Generally, when people work less, they have a less of a carbon footprint, not in the least because they don't drive their cars to work, because et cetera, all these different things. Universal basic income can help women escape abusive relationships. A rape shelter, also in Canada, surprise, surprise, implemented basic income with a lot of success. It helped women leave abusive relationships. It helps us escape from quote-unquote bullshit jobs. 37% of Brits think that their jobs are meaningless. 100% of the people in the room I now sit in think their jobs are meaningless. So TV consumption, very high. I've said this already, in countries with long working hours like the United States and Japan. If we had more time to be ourselves, we might actually be something worthwhile rather than experts about the fucking Baltimore Ravens.
I just think we're going to need to experiment with it first. One of the things I love about America's political system is federalism. It allows us to engage in experimentation at the local level and then try things at the universal level.
It might be some sort of requirement that states or municipalities or however we arrange it have programs like this, but I think these programs will be locally driven and locally controlled.
I like initiatives like this and social initiatives to be as broad as possible, so that way we're all going through it as a country. I would like as much unity as possible.
Just wrapping up on universal basic income, I think it's a one of these ideas that I think could be a solution to technological unemployment. I'm really attracted to the idea. I agree we should have experimentation. I don't have a problem with that. That doesn't slow me down in my support for the idea. There's a lot of other benefits, it seems to me. The conversation we kind of veered off into the theory of political transition and economic transition, which I think is good. But I guess that's something we need to think more about, because a lot of these ideas that frankly I'm most interested in are about kind of outside the box types of things like universal basic income. So how do we get people to act in their own self-interest and look beyond the end of the month? Thank you for joining us today on the Future Left podcast. I'm Adam Simpson, here with Casey Rogers saying goodbye, and also goodbye from Mike Bufano. Say bye, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, sir.
Goodbye.